Romans, masters of warfare and legendary strategists, believed they were invincible. But what if I told you that, at times, their mighty war machine was defeated in shocking and even humiliating ways? What could have been so ingenious, so unpredictable, that it dismantled the impeccable discipline of the legions? Picture this: a well-trained army, equipped with the finest weapons of its time, facing an enemy that seemed inferior. Yet, instead of an easy victory, the Romans fell into traps they never saw coming. Through invisible ambushes, guerrilla strategies, and even the terrain itself turned against them, the barbarians proved that brute strength isn't always enough to win. These moments weren't just defeats for Rome. They altered the course of history. They showed that even giants can fall when faced with creative minds willing to do whatever it takes. And now, you'll discover how unexpected tactics expose the vulnerabilities of the greatest empire the world has ever known. In today's video, we'll dive into 5 barbarian strategies that completely caught the Romans off guard. From deadly ambushes in treacherous forests to lightning-fast attacks where the Romans least expected, each tactic reveals a powerful lesson about how the unexpected can change everything. And believe me, number 3 is so ingenious that modern strategists still study it to this day. Get ready for a journey that will challenge what you know about Roman power and show you that, in war, thinking outside the box can be the most lethal weapon of all. If you love history and want to keep exploring the most fascinating and unexpected moments of the past, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel now. That way, you won't miss a single detail of these epic stories, and you'll help share the passion for history with more people. In the year 9 AD, 3 Roman legions led by Publius Quinctilius Varus marched confidently through the dense and seemingly endless Teutoburg forest in Germania. They believed their training and discipline would carry them through any challenge. But unknown to them, Arminius, a trusted ally of Rome who secretly turned against them, had orchestrated a devastating ambush. Using the narrow paths and thick vegetation to his advantage, Arminius forced the Roman soldiers into disarray, where their formation and tactics were rendered useless. Chaos erupted as the Germans struck with precision, exploiting every weakness the Romans exposed. The forest itself became a weapon, its natural obstacles separating units and preventing reinforcements. Roman soldiers, heavily armored and accustomed to open field battles, struggled to maneuver in the confined space. Meanwhile, their attackers moved swiftly and with deadly intent, using hit-and-run tactics to wear them down. As the casualties mounted, the mighty Roman war machine was reduced to scattered and terrified groups of men, desperately trying to survive. Arminius had proven that knowledge of the land and unconventional strategies could overpower even the most disciplined army. But what truly shook Rome was not just the loss of thousands of men, but the psychological blow. How could an empire so powerful be undone by its own terrain? This defeat sent shockwaves through Rome, forcing them to reconsider their invincibility. Yet, the Romans weren't the only ones to learn from their mistakes. Across the empire, new threats began to emerge, each one testing Rome's ability to adapt. And in Hispania, a new kind of warfare would challenge everything the Romans thought they knew about battle. In the rugged mountains of Hispania, the Roman legions faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The Lusitanians, led by the legendary Viriatus, fought not with brute force, but with cunning and patience. Instead of engaging the Romans head-on, they melted into the hills, striking only when the time was right. Ambushes on supply lines, lightning raids on camps, and relentless harassment left the Romans frustrated and vulnerable. Unlike traditional battles, there was no clear front line, no enemy to confront directly. The Lusitanians turned the landscape into their ally, blending into the terrain and making every advance costly for Rome. The psychological toll on the Romans was immense. Soldiers grew paranoid, unsure if the next bend in the road would lead to an ambush or safety. Supplies dwindled as the Lusitanians disrupted critical routes, forcing the Romans to rely on dangerous and unpredictable resupply missions. Over time, The invincible image of the Roman legions began to crumble as they found themselves outmatched not by numbers, but by strategy. Rome's rigid methods and reliance on discipline couldn't contend with an enemy that fought like shadows, striking when least expected and disappearing before retaliation was possible. But this war of attrition wasn't just about physical exhaustion. It tested Rome's ability to adapt to an entirely new kind of warfare. As the Lusitanians demonstrated that flexibility and ingenuity could triumph over brute strength, the seeds of future rebellions were planted elsewhere in the empire. In the years to come, enemies would not only fight smarter, but use psychological warfare to their advantage. How could Rome respond to foes who turned even the most hopeless situations into opportunities? The Galatians of Telamon would soon show how perception itself could become a battlefield. In 225 BC, the Roman legions faced the Galatians at the Battle of Telamon, a confrontation they believed would be a straightforward victory. The Galatians, surrounded by Roman forces on both sides, seemed doomed. But instead of succumbing to panic, they executed a strategy so unexpected that it sent shockwaves through their enemies. With no way to escape, the Galatians turned their apparent disadvantage into an act of psychological brilliance. They formed two lines, one facing each Roman army, and fought with their backs exposed, giving the impression that retreat was not an option and that their resolve was unbreakable. This move threw the Romans into disarray. The legions, accustomed to enemies breaking ranks or surrendering under pressure, hesitated. Why would the Galatians act so boldly? Was it bravery, or did they have reinforcements hidden somewhere nearby? The hesitation was enough for the Galatians to inflict significant damage, exploiting the Romans' momentary indecision to weaken their ranks. The psychological impact on the Roman commanders was profound. Even a perceived imbalance in confidence was enough to disrupt the meticulously trained legions, proving that fear and uncertainty could be weapons just as effective as swords and shields. What made this tactic so powerful was its simplicity. It didn't require advanced weaponry or overwhelming numbers, just a willingness to manipulate perception. The victory wasn't in defeating the Romans outright, but in making them question their own superiority. If the Galatians could weaponize fear so effectively, what other vulnerabilities could Rome's enemies exploit? The answer awaited them in Italy, where the Samnites would teach the Romans that even the land they controlled could be turned against them. As the Roman Republic expanded, its control over central Italy became critical to maintaining its growing power. But during the Samnite revolts, particularly at Fregellae, the Romans discovered the devastating effects of a scorched earth strategy. The Samnites knew they couldn't defeat Rome in open battle, so they devised a plan to starve and isolate the legions. They burned crops, poisoned wells, and destroyed food supplies, leaving the Romans to face not just an enemy army, but the harsh realities of hunger and exhaustion. This strategy transformed the battlefield into a logistical nightmare. Roman troops, heavily reliant on consistent supply lines, found themselves stranded without food or water. Forced to forage in hostile territory, morale plummeted as starvation and sickness spread through the ranks. The Samnites didn't need to fight the Romans directly. Their patience and willingness to sacrifice their own resources turned the tide. Rome, built on discipline and order, struggled to adapt to an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Even after the immediate threat subsided, the psychological scars lingered. The Romans had faced defeat without a single major battle. How could they protect their vast empire if every rebellion turned their resources into liabilities? This question loomed large as a new threat emerged in the icy reaches near the Danube, where nature itself became the deadliest ally against Rome's legions. How would the Romans contend with an enemy that wielded winter as a weapon? In the depths of the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire's decline was becoming increasingly evident, but the Suebi delivered a lesson in tactical brilliance that caught even the most seasoned Roman commanders off guard. Stationed near the Danube River, Roman forces relied on the natural barrier of its frozen surface to deter any attacks. They believed the brutal winter and icy expanse would shield them. The Suebi, however, saw an opportunity hidden in the frozen stillness of the season. As temperatures dropped and the river solidified, the Suebi waited patiently for the thickest ice to form. Under the cover of darkness and harsh winter storms, they advanced silently across the frozen Danube. Their movements were calculated, each step muffled by the snow and wind. Roman outposts near the river, lulled into complacency by the assumption of safety, were ill-prepared for the swift and brutal assault. The Suebi struck with precision, cutting through disorganized defenses and plunging the Roman lines into chaos. Soldiers, caught between the freezing cold and the enemy's ferocity, fell in droves as the invaders pressed their advantage. The attack was more than a tactical success. It was a psychological blow. The Romans had always prided themselves on their ability to adapt to any challenge. Yet they found themselves helpless against an enemy that had turned the very environment into a weapon. The Danube, once their trusted shield, became a stage for their undoing. As the snow settled and the Suebi retreated into the shadows, the Romans were left to grapple with an unsettling realization. If even nature could be used against them, what other vulnerabilities lay waiting to be exploited? If the Suebi could turn nature itself into a weapon against Rome, imagine what other unexpected forces could lead to the downfall of entire legions. Some Roman legions didn't just suffer defeats, they vanished from history without a trace. What really happened to them? Were they wiped out in battle, betrayed from within, or lost to the unknown? Click now to uncover the mysteries of the Roman legions that disappeared without a trace.